Welcome back to the Imperfection Wellness Podcast. My name is Scott Possley, and I'm your host, and thank you so much for being here today. Today, we're discussing something that's quite simple but very powerful, and that's next right action. This is the ninth and final concept of Possley's paradigm, and if you're new to this podcast, Possley's paradigm is a framework I created to help us separate from our thoughts, to find contentment from within, and live with greater presence and awareness, moving from a reaction response all the time to a responding. And when we respond, we bring intention into our actions. As a reminder, head over to imperfectionwellness.com. Again, that's imperfectionwellness.com. And click on Possley's Paradigm. Get your free copy today, and let's start applying all 9 concepts. But that being said, let's get back to today's episode. So many times I was paralyzed by my thoughts, overwhelmed to the point where sometimes the only thing I could do was scroll mindlessly or binge watch TV shows or reach for anything to numb the discomfort. And if that's ever happened to you, you're not alone. We all experience these moments when life feels heavy, and the idea of taking an action step seems almost impossible. But here's the good news. There is a way out. And it's a simple, practical approach to getting unstuck. It's called next right action. Let's explore how setting an intention and taking the next small step can shift us from being in a state of overwhelm to being empowered. Overwhelm is a tricky thing. When we feel it, our minds often race with thoughts like, there's too much to do, I can't do this, I don't even know where to start, I'll never get it all done. And that's such a vicious cycle to be in. These thoughts feed feelings of stress and overwhelm and helplessness, and that makes us more likely to avoid taking any action. So what do? We find a way to escape or to numb or to distract or avoid. Maybe it's scrolling through social media. Maybe it's indulging in substances. Maybe it's diving into distractions that provide temporary relief but leave us feeling worse in the long run. But remember the key insight with the paradigm. We are not our thoughts. We are separate from what our thoughts say about us and the world around us. And when we attach ourselves to the stories of our minds, we lose sight of this present moment. We feel stuck, and we believe the narrative that we're incapable of moving forward. But there is a way to break free. What if instead of spiraling into avoidance, we could pause, set an intention, and take just one small step? And believe me, some of the steps we're talking about are very small. Putting your shoes on. One small step. Going towards the door. Another small step. Walking out the door, another step. Walking around the block, the last step, and then coming home. Something as simple as walking outside can be a challenge for some people when they're overwhelmed and just want to sit on the couch and numb. So we break these tasks up into bite-sized pieces. Setting an intention is a mindful act. It's about pausing, grounding yourself in the present, and deciding what you want to focus on. Whether it's finishing a task, prioritizing your well-being, or simply being kind to yourself. When we set an intention, we're no longer running on autopilot. Instead, we're making a conscious choice to direct our energy towards something meaningful. Imagine your to-do list feels a mile long, and you're staring at it. You're overwhelmed, you're frozen, you don't know where to begin. Instead of reacting and going into a chaotic, overwhelmed feeling, pause. Take a slow, deep breath, and ask yourself, what's my intention right now? What's one thing I can do right now, however small? Maybe your intention is clarity. Maybe it's to tackle one item. Maybe it's an intention to simply treat yourself with compassion as you navigate the overwhelm. Whatever it is, naming your intention helps you to connect with your true self, the part of you that's separate from your ego and that endless chatter. And once you've set an intention, then you take action. But not just any action, the next right action. Going back to that analogy, there were times where I would come home from work or wake up on a weekend. Maybe I was hungover from drinking too much the night before. And I would sit on the couch overwhelmed, paralyzed. What was my intention? To separate from my thoughts. Okay, then how are you going to do that? Because sitting here is probably not the best thing to do. All right, I want to go to the park, but oh my God, getting to the park, it's like 14 steps. Well, then what's your next right action? If my intention is to engage in the world around me, to separate from my thoughts, what is one next right action? Maybe it's doing 25 jumping jacks. I talk about jumping jacks all the time. I love jumping jacks. Why? Because you're counting and doing an action at the same time. By default, you're not associated with your thoughts. Maybe it's meditating. Maybe it's going to the park. But in order to get to the park, what do you have to do? Put your shoes on. Walk to the door. Get outside. Get to the subway, to your car, to your bike, whatever it is, and enjoy the park. And sometimes I'd get to the park and I'm like, I'm done. And I'd head right back home. But when I set an intention, I can check a couple boxes and say, look what I achieved. And if you've never been frozen or sulking on a couch associated with what your thoughts say about you, you may not understand why these simple actions with intention are so important. But for those of you who have felt that overwhelm, this might resonate with you. What's the point of doing anything? We feel hopeless. And that's when we're taken down by our thoughts. That's what this paradigm is for. Because I was taken down by my thoughts. I didn't have hope. I felt overwhelm. And when I came to next right action, I was able to set that intention. And with my intention, I would look to the left, knowing my thoughts were sitting there on the right, ready to pounce and take me down. Because again, I used to believe that I was what my thoughts say about me. I thought I wasn't worth it. I didn't have this optimism, this knowledge, and I thought I was broken. When I learned about next right action, it was liberating for me because it didn't matter what the action was. I knew that I was able to do it. And in that next right step, I moved. And in movement with intention, I'm separate from my thoughts, if only for a moment. And then we create a mini win. We strengthen the muscle, and we continue setting an intention and performing next right action. That's why I'm such a big advocate of meditation. Because meditation gave me something to turn to. The meditation that I learned and teach, it's meditation that you can do anywhere. As long as you can sit and as long as you're safe, all you have to do is close your eyes and mentally repeat a sound, a vibration. The mantras in this tradition aren't even words. They're sound vibrations pleasing to the mind. And when you meditate, you're calming yourself. You're giving yourself resilience and adaptation energy because you're freeing yourself from association with the never-ending thoughts that circle and ruminate and are pervasive. And if those thoughts are negative, that's tough. Now, other people might have grandiose thoughts that say they're better than everybody. They don't feel bad, but that's the flip side. They're still associated with ego. And I was talking to someone recently who's like, you use the word ego differently. She's like, I'm used to thinking of it as, oh, he's an egomaniac, she's an egomaniac, they're an egomaniac. It's like, nope. That's kind of the Freudian psychologic term. In consciousness, meditation, spiritual, however you want to look at it, in that realm, I think of ego as identification of self. And with identification of self, the ego just grows from there. And it grows in the sense that it creates this idea, this sense of self, meaning it creates a sense of other. And if we're not careful in our current society, it creates this mindset of us versus them. And when it's us versus them, that creates separation. Thousands of years ago, this separation made sense. It was safety. What is different from me that could harm me? Whether it was, that saber-toothed tiger that we always talk about. But in today's world, we don't realize ego in the way that I've come to appreciate it. That it gives us our sense of self, but by doing so, it also starts telling us a story. And then we have egoic thoughts associated with it. The stories it tells us have to do with judgments, ratings, and comparisons. It's judging myself against someone other. It's rating me about how I'm doing compared to someone else. It's always comparing, and it's doing so with stories. Stories which are fragments and half-truths of what's really going on. And when we're associated with this story, we end up time traveling. We time travel to the past with regrets and frustration. We time travel to the future, worried about what might happen tomorrow. We turn on the news, we see doom and gloom and overwhelm. We see people telling us, watch out, they're coming to get us, whoever they are. Whatever group that this person's trying to marginalize. And separation continues. But I have something to tell you. We are more alike than we are different. Gender identity, sexuality, age, ethnicity, skin color, hair texture, all of those things are just external characteristics that are meaningless. I'm trained as a physician assistant, and I worked in healthcare for over 20 years. And if you put a needle into someone's arm to draw blood, there's a few locations you can guarantee that you will hit every time. It doesn't matter if they are old or young, what gender they are, what gender they identify with, what their sexuality is. It doesn't matter their height, their weight. Nothing matters. If you look anatomically, 99.999% of the time, if I need to get blood out of someone's vein, I know where to go. That's what I'm talking about. We've taken these external characteristics or how someone lives their life, and we've weaponized it. That's ego. When we are true self, free of ego, we realize there is more that unites us than divides us. That's what the paradigm is here to do. But when we live in a society that doesn't value this knowledge that I just shared with you, it can be overwhelming, especially if you feel like you are a them. Remember how I said it's us versus them? When you feel like a them, when you feel like an outsider, when you feel like you're less than, when you feel worthless, or anything in between, maybe it's not that intense. But I was born gay. I knew it from a very young age. I didn't know what it was. I just knew I had crushes on men. Didn't know what that meant. But at a very young age, that's not sexual. It's just what it was. And I grew up in a rural, conservative farming town. I was brought up Catholic right around the time of the AIDS epidemic. And I was sent the message very loudly and clearly that I'm going to rot in hell for being born. That is the collective ego pouncing, not knowing who I was. They didn't know who I was. I knew who I was. And I was scared to death. And I prayed every night for so many years for God to make me quote unquote normal. Because the collective ego was pouncing. The collective ego was scared because the ego is fear-based. Again, it separates us versus them. And back in the 80s, the minority them were gay men. And I remember the slogan that's burned in my mind, AIDS kills, fags dead. And I went to a Catholic grade school. I heard this in the hallways. I saw it on the news. I saw it on, TV shows. And it really, during my formative years, where we start to develop our identity, where we start to develop our sense of self-worth, I was lost. I was overwhelmed. I felt like nothing. And what did I do to cope? I ate. Because when I ate food, it numbed me. It gave me a little dopamine kick. I felt better. And then I weighed 300 pounds in high school and was mocked for being overweight. But at least there was something else they were making fun of me for. And then once I got to college, I lost weight and realized instead of food, I could numb myself with alcohol. I'm trying to tell a story here of how a cycle begins. So from a very young age, at the age of 6 or 7, the first time I was called faggot, it was at that Catholic grade school, some older boys. At that young age, that's when it started. Casting that self-doubt, creating that loop, which became self-fulfilling prophecy loop of I'm worthless. Fast forwarding to young adulthood in my 20s and 30s, great, I lost some weight, but I still feel the same way. What do? Drink. Makes me feel better. Takes away all the voices in my head that say you're less than. And the thoughts are always there. We're never going to be without thoughts. Now I know how to interact with them differently. And those thoughts that said I was worthless disappeared for a while until the next day when I was a little hungover and had to start all over again. And this went on for many years, and I was fine. I managed it well until the pandemic, when I didn't manage it well and my drinking started becoming a problem. And I started recognizing and having some dark moments where I'm like, if it's not a problem, it's about to become one, and I need to stop drinking. So I stopped drinking. I became a meditation teacher, and I don't know how I asked or what I asked for, but something outside of me inspired me. And that inspiration was so powerful, and it led me to create this paradigm. This paradigm which is created of 10 universal truths, which I've put into 9 concepts, because affirmations and gratitude I put together. So there's 9 categories in the paradigm, and I did that because of numerology. I was told that 9 is good, so I put affirmations and gratitude together because they're cousins, they're mindset shifters. But the reason I did this paradigm was because, oh my gosh, there's a way to get unstuck from these thought patterns, these limiting self-beliefs. I was talking to a friend one day, and she's like, you talk about your thoughts a lot. She's like, I really don't feel like that makes sense to me, but she's like, I do have this self-belief that I'm awkward in social situations, and so whenever I'm in a social situation, I feel super awkward. And I said, that's like my thoughts. My thoughts said I'm worthless. Your thoughts don't say that, but when you go into a social situation, you have, a little neural pathway, a little, shortcut in your brain that says, uh-oh, social situation, you're awkward, feel insecure, feel bad about yourself. I said, that's what I'm talking about. These self-limiting beliefs that start somewhere early on and creep up over time. And many times we're not even aware of them. Other people are. It's that story you always tell about yourself. It's how we inadvertently play victim or martyr. And I used to do this all the time. I didn't mean to, but I think 1, I attracted it because of my insecurity, and 2, I would always tell the story in my favor. And when I realized I had this victim martyr mentality, I'm like, oh my gosh, I can have a way out. And one day I jotted down and wrote down all the concepts of the paradigm. And there were more than 9 in the beginning. But then I started realizing, no, this is duplicative. This can go with this and this can go with that. And boom, there was the paradigm. These are universal truths. I created none of them. I just put them in a free framework because I do believe mental health is a human right. And we are going through life sleepwalking. You might not be, but I sure as hell was. And I don't want to sleepwalk anymore. I don't want you to sleepwalk anymore. If you're going to do something, I at least want you to know why. And if the why is simply because I know what I'm doing, I'm aware of what I'm doing, and I'm doing it with intentionality, then keep doing it. But if it's passive, and if it's mindless, and if it's numbing, and if you're trying to escape, then I want to try to give you a solution and a way out. And I had this paradigm years ago. I had started writing this book back in 2008, 2009, and I stopped writing it because I didn't have the last chapter. And it was during meditation teacher training where I talked to my teacher, Jeff, and he's like, action is key. The thoughts are always going to be there. The ego is always going to be there. It's not, I think, therefore I am. It's I am, therefore I think. I will always have thoughts, but now I know how to interact with them. Now that I'm aware, I'm no longer sleepwalking. My eyes are wide open. I can be the observer and kind of pull back from my thoughts and observe them. I can surrender. I can perform some gratitude. I can feel my feelings instead of storing them and pushing them back down when I lean in and let go. But I didn't have that last step. And that last step is action. And again, it's not just action. It's action with intention. We set an intention and we perform next right action. Those thoughts, those limiting self-beliefs, that voice within that says you're not good enough, you can't do this, or the voice that says you're better than everybody and you need to make sure that they pay and rally against them. That is going on in our society right now. There is a lot of, I guess I should try to be not PC, but just inclusive. There's a lack of appreciation for people's differences right now. And what we should do is relish in those differences because we are stronger when we are united. And I heard recently in the discourse of the American political system that the enemy is within. And I'm like, no, there's no enemy within. There's no enemy. That's ego. The scared ego that's trying to say they're coming to get us. The enemy's within. No, there's no bad person. Unless it's something or someone attached to their ego that is oppressing. Whether that's oppressing yourself, in my case, or oppressing others because of the masses, that collective ego, that's what we want to be aware of. That ego will never go away. That ego will never be fulfilled. There will never be enough. The ego will always want more. I bet you love that brand new smartphone the first day you get it. It's so bright and shiny. Then a couple weeks later it gets a scuff, and a couple weeks later a new phone comes out with more features, and suddenly your bright new shiny object isn't as great. The ego convinces you need that new phone. That's what I'm talking about. There's hundreds of scenarios we can go through, but I'm hoping you're getting where I'm coming from. So since we know the ego's never satisfied, we're always going to want more. We're aware of that. And another thing a friend of mine asked me, she's like, I don't understand if the ego is never satisfied. Why does it make you feel small? Well, again, the ego is a fear-based mechanism, and I was an undercompensator. So growing up, the masses I was led to believe, inadvertently my choice, but I was led to believe that I was wrong. And so the ego monopolized on that. And in order to keep me safe, it keeps you small and it keeps you hiding. And so since we are aware of these self-limiting beliefs, of these thought patterns, We utilize all the steps in the paradigm, but there were still times where I was stuck. I was overwhelmed. I'm like, this isn't working. I'm still broken. That's where action comes in, because when we set an intention and then perform next right action, that's our liberation. And it's true liberation that we repeat over and over and over. I still wake up every day with a heavy heart. In some way, shape, or form, I look in the mirror and that negative intrusive thought comes back saying, you're not good enough. Now I can smile at that thought. Now I know that thought is not me. It's an aspect of me. I am separate from that thought. That thought is a story. There's no truth in it. There's truth that it's there. I don't know anyone in my life who doesn't have self-doubt about some characteristic, whether it's how they're aging, how they look, how much money they make, what car they drive, what they look like compared to someone else. The second comparison comes in, it's ego. We all have some example of what I've described. Some situations may be worse than mine, might be much less. It doesn't matter. What matters is we start realizing we are separate from that voice inside that says we are not good enough or we are better than. Because we are all one. There is more that unites us than divides us. So we use the steps of the paradigm and we end on action. And action is the liberating step because through the action step, we're able to get out of being stuck associated. So I told you my initial intention was, I want to separate from my thoughts. I want to engage in life again. I don't want to be miserable on the couch. I don't want to continue drinking to numb. So what's my intention? To re-engage with life. Then what's my next action? I don't know. So I made a list. I call it my life preserver list. And the days are fewer and they're not as intense, but every so often it'll creep up. And I'm like, ooh, I feel a heaviness. And when I feel the heaviness, I'm like, something's happening. Now that I'm aware, I try to do the action before the heaviness takes hold. Because once the heaviness takes hold, it could be a little while. That's a tougher one. So we start becoming aware, which is the first concept that I talked about several episodes ago. If you don't listen to these in order, that's fine. Go listen to the episode on awareness. And I'm aware that it's coming, that this feeling is coming up. And I'm like, you need to do something. You need to run. You need to do your favorite jumping jacks. You need to meditate. You need to go outside. Studies show nature has huge benefits without us even realizing it. So get into nature. Even if you live in a major city like I do, get to nature. Hug a tree. Maybe I'll have an episode on hugging trees. There is a lot of research in connection with earth and grounding. And you're like, I'm not hugging a tree. I've done it. If you're open to it, you can feel energy, but I don't want to be discredited because I've hugged a tree. So let's move on from that. Be by water, be by nature. Meditate, bake, cook, call a friend, listen to music, have a dance party. If you've never had a dance party, whether it's by yourself or with your partner or your kids or whatever, have a dance party. Turn the music on and flail about like no one's watching. Lower the blinds. Have fun. I've done it several times. It gets you detached from your thoughts. It pulls you back into present moment. That's what next right action does. That's why we do it. And I always say, though I presented the concepts from 1 through 9 in a certain order, I think they build on each other. There's no order. You utilize them however you want to. That's the magic of this paradigm. I give it away for free. It's printed. You can get a printed copy on my website. Because I think a printed copy is important, because if you're not familiar with what to do, you're going to forget. and that cloud sweeps in, and then you emotionally sink and you're like, now what? You're probably not going to go to my website and print it out. And if you don't have your life preserver list made, you're not going to make one when you feel bad because nothing's going to feel fun. So make that life preserver list. What are 10 things that you can do that are small actions that can help you look to the left, set an intention, and perform that next right action? There were times where it was something as simple as I would get up and clean the counter. I would just wipe the counter off, and then I'd come right back onto the couch. And then I'd literally put my shoes on, go to the store, buy one item, and come right back. I didn't think it helped. I didn't. I'll be honest with you. But I knew I was building a muscle, and over time it got easier. And no matter what, me getting up and wiping down that counter was better than me doing nothing. Create a small win. Again, if you've never been stuck frozen in an iceberg of life as you're in your living room, feeling like you can't reach out to somebody because what if they don't answer? What if they don't return my phone call? What if they don't text back? What if they're all going out and they don't include me? I had all those moments. I had all those thoughts. They weren't just thoughts. They were reality. People didn't call back. People were doing stuff without me. And I would sink deeper and deeper. I was wallowing. I wasn't wallowing intentionally. I didn't want to wallow. I wanted out. I did talk therapy. I did antidepressants. Nothing helped me. And maybe it's out there in a form that I don't know, but that's why I'm so passionate about this paradigm. And that's why this last step is so important. The clouds continue to return. The overwhelm continues to return. It's a daily practice, but it gets easier. And it's so much easier to expend the energy to improve yourself than it is for the energy zap you get when you're numbing yourself. Drinking was my numbing agent of choice. But what about chronic shopping? Sex addiction, alcoholism, drugs, overexercise. And if you partake in any of those, there is nothing wrong with that. This is a judgment-free zone. Whatever your actions are, however you identify, if your goal is to get better, come to the table and learn. We're doing these behaviors because we're overwhelmed and no one's talking about what we can do. Intention and next right action. Each concept independent of itself is not as strong as the sum. The sum of these 9 concepts are what make Possley's paradigm. We have to start with awareness, but I think we also have to end with the icing on the cake is intention with next right action. That's what I hope you take away from today. We're going to close here for today with next right action, knowing that there's a part 2. And in that part 2, we'll talk more about mindfulness, life at half speed. Talk about some journaling. Talk about amygdala hijack. If you don't know about that, that's an interesting one to talk about. And we'll go into some more next right action steps. I don't think the list will ever be complete, but at least we can continue building our own arsenal. At a minimum, I'd love you to create a life preserver list today. Put it in your phone, write it on a piece of paper. If you're driving, do not text and drive. Talk about a mindless, dangerous activity. Please bring intention to your driving. But make your life preserver list, and the next time you feel a little stuck, or you're turning for a drink, or you're turning to overexercise, or you're turning to shopping, so you can feel something, so you can numb that ugly feeling and maybe have a little dopamine hit. We'll talk about dopamine detox in a later episode. Little dopamine hits kind of, help us, and we just want to be mindful of that. But the next time you feel you're reaching for something without intention, pause, take that breath, set an intention, and go to your life preserver list. Perform the next right action. Go wash your hands. Do it at half speed. Doing it at half speed, you'll automatically bring yourself back into awareness. Well, little precursor to what's coming in the next episode. Go wipe your counter down. Do your impromptu dance party. Do your jumping jacks. Walk around the block. Hug a tree. Go to nature. Listen to your favorite song. Watch a YouTube video of kids laughing or funny news bloopers. Stuff that's going to bring you positivity and happiness. Don't go towards fear-mongering. Don't go towards a negative news cycle or negative social media that's only going to pull you down. Put up some guardrails and say, no, I'm taking care of me today. I'm not going to fall into the trap of what seems to be quote-unquote mainstream. So as we wrap up today's episode, visit imperfectionwellness.com, trying to really build out free resources to support you on your wellness journey. It's not one size fits all. It's one size fits some. And I'm trying to be as broad as possible so that this can resonate with you, that we can start living with intention and inclusivity. You can be different from me. I don't have to like you, but I'm going to respect you. That's where we're going to move towards. Also on my website, there are links to a free meditation that I teach and a paid meditation that I teach. It's been a game changer for me, so check it out. But just know I'm so appreciative to those of you who listen. And until next time, and as always, wishing you the absolute best on your wellness journey. Have a wonderful day.